So Jane, why don't you let Mr. Lynch in?
All right, he's in.
I'm
Good
in.
morning, Mr. Lynch. I'm Jane McCarthy, and I work with Grace, and we have our 4 students from BC High on this morning, and they're all current 11th graders, rising seniors. I feel like it's any minute they're going to be leading our school as amazing seniors. And as you can see, Grace Regan is on as well, and we're so excited that you're able to join us this morning. So I just hit record, and Grace, I'll let you and Bob take over.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Lynch. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So I'm so excited to have our first students with us, and we're recording this for Arts Month at BC High. We decided we were going to have an arts festival in May, excuse me, and celebrate all of the arts. And what we decided when we went out virtually was that we really needed to continue to keep our traditions and rituals alive. And with the Arts Council and the Student Arts Council, which was started this year, we decided to promote the arts this month, and some really exciting things happening at BC High, as you know. We're actually performing one of our performances on Zoom, and the boys can tell you about that. But what I wanted to do, Mr. Lynch, is first of all, let the boys introduce themselves to you, and then give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your BC High experience, and then we'll turn it into our question and answer, which we would be happy to answer any questions you have as well. But I just wanted to let the boys know. So Mr. Lynch and I met when I first started at BC High. I was really in awe of his work, and I think all of you know how committed I am to the arts at BC High and the art world. I just love the arts. And I reached out to Mr. Lynch, met with him in Washington, D.C. at his office, and we developed a wonderful relationship. I attended a few galas with him. We've been in touch. We featured Mr. Lynch in our arts cultural magazine at BC High a year ago. And it was a great story about his work and his BC High experience. And then, we've stayed in touch. He's been on campus, and he's really interested in supporting us and helping you grow. So thank you for all that you do, Mr. Lynch, member of the class of 67. We're delighted that you're here. And why don't I turn it to Brandon to start?
Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a visual arts student at BC High. So I'm very interested in specifically sequential art, illustration, and just using art as a means to storytell, basically. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Brendan?
Yeah, my name is Brendan. Right now at BC High, I'm in the AP 2D design class, and next year I'm going into the AP drawing class, which I'm pretty excited about. And yeah, also I write for the school newspaper, and I do the comics for the Eagle.
I did not know that. That's awesome. Great. Lucas?
So, hi, my name is Lucas Hurley. Right now I'm in the concert band and the jazz big band at BC High. And like Brandon and Brendan, I'm in AP 2D design right now, and I'm going on to AP drawing. And yeah, as like a career, I'm more focused on visual arts.
Great. And Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Recupero. I'm the vice president of chamber choir. I've been in choir for 3 years now. Also, I paint outside of class. I don't currently take any visual arts classes at school, but I help to found the art club that meets after school on Wednesdays.
Terrific.
That's great.
So Mr. Lynch, welcome.
So, it's great to be here. And in fact, I'm here in Washington, D.C. right now, but we are, my wife Diane and I have been sequestered here in the house for 2.5 months right now. And tomorrow we take a drive up to Massachusetts because we are going to Cape Cod for my mother's 96th birthday. She lives in Cape by herself, very stubborn person. And so she's there by herself, and turns 96 on Saturday. So we're going to be there for a few days. So I'll get some of that Massachusetts air, excited about that. Before I jump in on myself, I'd love to ask a few questions. First of all, if each of you, Brandon, Brendan, Lucas, and Chris, could just tell me where you're from, what town you're from, and and then I have just a couple of other questions after that. So I guess we can go in that order. Brandon, Brendan, Lucas, Chris.
Right. I'm from South Boston. Currently, I'm in Newport, Rhode Island. That's where we've been for most of the quarantine. But for BC High, I live in South Boston, which
Great.
Short commute.
Very short. Nice. And then Brendan.
I'm from Weymouth. I've lived there my whole life.
And Lucas?
I'm also from Weymouth, and I've lived there my whole life. Me and Brendan went to the same elementary school.
Great. And Chris?
And I live in Easton.
In Easton. Okay. So actually, let me just, I'll just jump in and maybe have some questions, other questions at the end. So I grew up in Stoughton, right next to Easton. And I basically, I don't know how you get there, Chris, but my experience of getting to BC High after 8 years at St. Mary's School, which no longer exists in Stoughton, was to leave my house and walk about a mile down to a place where I could either get a bus once an hour or I could hitchhike. And I hitchhiked to Mattapan, usually. And then in Mattapan, I got on the trolley and went to Ashmont, if I remember. And then I got on the subway and went to Columbia Station, and then crossed the bridge in the cold mornings with the wind in the middle of winter, icy with salt water. And then got to school. Usually tried to get there. I don't know what time it starts now, but I used to get there about 8 a.m. And the best part of the day was in the cafeteria with all the other kids. We'd get together, and they had some wonderful pastries that we could start our day off with. So, I mean, I remember that experience, which was a sort of on the road experience, and I've spent the rest of my life on the road, traveling for the work that I do, and in a variety of other ways. But starting there with BC High, I'll say a few words, I guess, just about myself, and then we can have whatever direction of questions you'd like to go. My interest in school, basically, as whether it was grammar school or high school, was always in the creative side of things, whether it was writing or painting or all the things that you guys are involved with. The difficulty was that for the 8 years at St. Mary's School and the 4 years at BC High, there wasn't really any formal classes in any of those areas, not in music and not in theater, not in the visual arts. There were after-school events. So there was a jazz club, for example, after school, and there was a camera club, and I participated a little bit in those two things. There was I don't know if they still have this. There was a magazine called The Batalfian. Does that still exist? So I was a Batalfian writer, and so I was able to nurture my my writing interests, my music interests, and a little bit of visual through the camera club after school. And then in addition to that, I got involved with music, not officially and not even through those after school groups, but because the Beatles had just come out and the Rolling Stones had just come out. And I got excited about that music. I had 2 years of piano lessons when I was in the 6th and 7th grade. And that excitement and meeting another classmate named Roger Falcione, we decided to start a band. Now, we didn't know how to play anything, but we knew we wanted to have a band. So those were the days when you started a band, then you got the instruments, then you learned how to play. And the first thing you did before you did any of that is you booked a performance. And so we had the motivation, before we actually were any good, of having a few gigs set up. And the most interesting performances that we did were right there at BC High. There was a dance every Saturday night. And the Saturday night dance was at what was then the gymnasium, and everything happened in that gymnasium at the time. Gym was in there, sports events were in there, the convenings of all the class members were in there, and we got to play at these dances a number of times. And even one time, the name of my band was the Rising Suns, and Rising Suns from the song House of the Rising Suns by Eric Burdon and the Animals. Well, amazingly to me, there was one concert at BC High in the time I was there, and it was Eric Burdon and the Animals. And so our band got to be the warm-up band for the opening band for Eric Burdon and the Animals, which was pretty much a highlight of my first half of my life. And it was pretty wonderful. So the thing for me about BC High was not any one thing. It wasn't the classes. It wasn't the campus. It was the experience of all of those parts coming together, and all of those things were things that stood me in good stead, over time. I discovered my interest in literature in the classroom there. That was the one thing that really interested me. So when I left, I went to UMass Amherst, and I became an English major focusing on poetry and creative writing at UMass Amherst. And a lot of times, people think, poetry would be maybe the hardest way to make a buck in America. And it probably is, but it's a fabulous preparation for everything. Writing, discipline. One of the things I always remember that I've learned from that was spending a lot of time on the interpretation of one word, for example, in a poem. And you've probably all done that in classes. Well, that preparation, that drilling down, is a fabulous preparation for writing congressional testimony, which I have to do in this job, or writing congressional actual planks for a few words that can shift millions of dollars for the arts. So those were some general experiences in my prep for this career. Now, just saying a few words about that, my career was not a linear career, let's put it that way. The most exciting thing for me in college at UMass was going to Woodstock, the Woodstock concert. And that was 50 years ago. But the excitement of the energy of 500,000 people there for music and art was something that showed me the power of mobilization of people for many things, many causes, and through the arts. So when I got out of college, to be honest, I sort of explored 5 years. I continued playing in rock and roll bands at night. I continued doing freelance writing, and I wrote. I had a 2-day career at the Patriot Ledger as a reporter. Who knew you had to type? Poets don't have to type. We used to do everything longhand. But I did a few things like that, and stumbled into real estate. My parents thought, the other, fooling around career, sampling, I needed a backup. I got a real estate broker's license, and I got a job down in Abington, Mass, and I did that for 2 years while playing music at night and writing and so on. And then at the end of those 2 years, I did what every English major really wants to do, and that is quit your job, take the money, buy a Volkswagen bus, and head out across America for a year, United States, Canada, Mexico. So I did that, and I returned after that year, and amazingly started in on the same pathway again. But through that pathway, the writing led me to write an article for the Daily Hampshire Gazette on a new organization that had started at UMass Amherst. I was 5 years out then, called the Arts Extension Service. So I wrote this article, and in looking at the Arts Extension Service, I said, that's what I want to do with my life. That is the career I'm in now. It's arts management, it's arts advocacy, it's got a little bit of business, it's got a little bit of art. And, for somebody like myself who likes the broad approach as opposed to, you know, drilling down on just one area. It was perfect. So the literature starting at BC High and the writing starting at BC High led me to that Daily Hampshire Gazette where I found the job. And then I did what wasn't very popular or common back then. I asked for an internship at that place. I was 25. And I did a 2-month unpaid internship that led to a 10-year job as the CEO of the Arts Extension Service that led to becoming a board member of the organization that I run now. And then 35 years ago, on January 1st, I became the executive director of this organization. But this organization back then had 3 staff people and a $350,000 budget. And today it has 65 staff people and a $19 million budget. So the other thing about that trajectory is that in order to do that growth, it was a different organization every year. You know, running an organization with 3 staff is completely different than running an organization with 6 staff and moving on the way up. And so today, Americans for the Arts is the national arts advocacy organization and the national organization for all of the local and state arts agencies, like a local arts agency in Dorchester or the State Arts Council in Boston. We have 4,500 of them across the country, and Americans for the Arts serves them, trains them, comes up with research for them, and does all of that work. And then we have a second organization called the Americans for the Arts Action Fund, which is a political organization. And it has, it's a different tax bracket, which means you can use all the money for advocacy. We have 430,000 citizen advocate members. It's free, and I'd love all of you to join. You can't necessarily vote yet, but you'll be ready when you can. And through that vehicle, we let our members across the country know when there's a political issue that needs to be voted on federally that they can take action on. And that has proved to be massively effective in keeping the funding entities like the National Endowment for the Arts alive and under attack. They've been under attack for years, and keeping it there and keeping the money increasing every year, which is what we do. So those 2 fronts are the work, advocacy leading to policy, research that leads to the advocacy, and training of these arts organizations all across the country. And so with that, I'm going to stop. There's a lot more that could be told, but that's a snapshot of how I got to sit in front of you guys today and talk a little bit about this work. So any reactions or any questions, or however Grace and Jane want to handle it?
Sure. That was incredible. And I know the boys, I'm seeing them nodding. That's great. Any of you have a question that you want to ask Mr. Lynch?
I have a quick question. So you said that you traveled a lot after high school or college. Do you have any like place that you traveled to that was like particularly influential to you or kind of inspirational to you?
That's a great question. So, so the reason I travel is that we're a membership organization, and you have to reach the members, and you know, we're reaching everybody virtually today, but there's nothing like face-to-face connection. So organizations from all across the country would ask me to come. And so basically for 35 years, once a week, pretty much, I have gone someplace in the country. So I've been to every state and a number of countries, a dozen different countries to speak on behalf of the American cultural system. And I'll tell you, the first answer to that question might seem like a cop-out, but I have found an amazing depth and breadth of excellence, let's say, and innovation and creativity in every one of these communities that I've gone to, big and small. The American ability to be creative and innovative for somebody like me comes through in all these places. Now, partially, I'm in a rarefied situation. I come into a city, I'm met by somebody who knows the city's cultural entities like the back of their hand. They're very proud of it, so they take me around to see the place. And then I give a speech, usually to what they want me to do is to talk to elected leaders, business leaders, people who can help advance the cause of the arts. And so I'll give a talk to the arts community, the business community, and the political community. And you know, I almost always can reference wonderful things that I've seen just that day in that city. But places that have been inspirational, particularly to me, a couple of places that, you know, I have loved. One is when I was on that Volkswagen bus trip, I got to see so many places, and there's so much beauty in America. But I ran out of money in Santa Barbara, California. And so we ended up staying there for a few months. And we were able to, you know, get some jobs. But I actually learned how to do wood carving in Santa Barbara. And I actually added that to my repertoire of part-time jobs. So for 2 years, I made wood carved objects along with playing music and so on. And love the place. Santa Barbara was an inspirational place for me. So that's one. But the entire West Coast, you know, is spectacular. The coast of Oregon, where we would camp, the rocky coast of Oregon is still pretty much unexplored and gorgeous. So that's one place. I love Miami. I love Miami Beach. The energy of Miami Beach and the Miami Latino community and multi-ethnic community is, you know, just wonderful. So much so that we bought a place, a small condo in Miami Beach, partially so that my mother, when she turned 80, to say, hey, we'd love to, you know, have you go to Miami Beach. So at the age of 80, she started going to Miami Beach. She's 96 now, and she just came back from Miami Beach. But 3 years ago, we said, hey, Mom's immortal. Let's buy a place as opposed to rent it every year. So we did. So we did that. But that place, you know, is a place I love to come back to. So there's two. But then I'll also say that the international travel has been really interesting. And you know, my heritage is Irish, and I have loved going to Ireland. Probably have gone over there to work and give talks and so on a dozen times over the inspiration of Ireland has been one place. But you know, again, almost you name a place, and I can tell you some inspirational things that I found there. And so I am just now cutting back on the amount of that kind of travel. I have the 65 staff, and I encourage them all to be out there serving the public. And so even now, sometimes what'll happen is I'll find myself going out, you know, the door to give a talk, and a wonderful staff person like this guy named Randy Cohen, who's my research guy, he'll be going out the door, and I'll be going, you know, he'll be headed off to Paris, and I'm going to Duluth. And I'm thinking, what have I done wrong with my life? But you know, it's you do what you do, and it's really fun. So, long answer to your question. Sorry.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question.
Sure, Chris.
Oh, Brandon, you can go.
All right, thank you. So a lot of what you mentioned was like advocating for the arts and helping systematically to ensure that funding remains for artistic organizations. So as rising seniors, what do you think like we can do to help the art community at BC High or even our communities at large?
You know, there's so let me just say that in the United States, it's a different system than the rest of the world. It's not as supportive in the United States of the arts and of the art of artists as well. And so I always think of the arts as in the United States as, you know, having faced a series of surges forward, but big setbacks. You know, setbacks like, and if you think about this, setbacks like in Boston in 1630, the arrival of the Puritans. And the Puritans were a fairly grim group, and they outlawed things like dance and theater and music and certain colors. And so you have a backdrop like that goes right through to today. You know, the President Trump and the administration zeroed out all the federal funding for the arts, all of it, 3 years in a row now, and they're putting in for a fourth year. So you have, you know, and many more examples of that negativity over all that time. Then you have examples of people pushing back. You know, stealth pop-up theaters also started to happen in the early 1700s, and you know, George Washington was a big theater fan. He used to commission plays before battles, and on throughout history. So you had these two threads that were going, but one of the things that started to happen in the mid-century, last century, like around 1949, the first local arts councils, which is my bread and butter work, started to pop up around the country. First one was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the second one was in Quincy, Illinois. And you know, they popped up because you could go to the big cities and get some cultural activity, but the rest of the country was kind of starving. And a lot of people returning, a lot of guys returning from World War II, said, "Hey, we want it in our own town," and they started these entities. Now, whatever the entity is, local interest, local advocacy, and then it's at the local and the state and the national level, is the key to what has driven the growth of the arts, I think, in America in the last 50 years. And so, or actually more than that, you know, 75 years. So you guys can get involved with entities at the local level and, you know, perhaps volunteer to help them, perhaps get a part-time job with them, or perhaps simply get involved in their advocacy efforts. And there's all kinds of things that they need, and they'll tell you what they need. They usually do programs. They also have to do policy and advocacy work in order to survive. You know, anybody who knows how to fundraise, for example, is gold in the arts world because that's what is needed. My wife, Diane, was a ballerina for 25 years. And she took that ballerina skill and brought it to a career as a development officer. So she's the chief development officer for institutional giving at National Public Radio at NPR. She's downstairs raising money for them right now. But she brought ballerina skill, art focus to that work. You know, just finding any entity to pop into and to help with becomes, I think, really important. Things that you were planning on doing at BC High, like festivals. You know, festivals are a great tool for bringing, you know, lots of different parts of the community, in that case, the BC High community together. And you find continually that people, even if they don't know it, are involved with the arts in some way. You know, choirs that have been mentioned here, or garage bands, or all kinds of things. And, you know, my feeling is you encourage all of it. You push all of it forward because it's all valid. There was, you know, in the last century, there was early on a lot of push by institutional arts organizations for excellence versus access. And a lot of times people would pit those two things together against one another, thinking one was really good and important, symphonies and ballets and things like that, and the other was frivolous. But in fact, it's all part of creative expression. And so anything you can do to encourage that is really, really an important way to get involved. Someone else had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you think the current economic crisis is going to affect the arts?
It's going to be devastating, but the arts will bounce back. You know, one thing about the arts, we have been, you might have seen it on our website, we've taken the lead in fighting for continued support for the arts in this pandemic. And so the first thing we did was to get some surveys out there. We have 3 that are going on. One about arts organizations. There are 120,000 nonprofit arts organizations in America, and another 600,000 for-profit ones like Broadway, Hollywood, or the local music store. And then the second study is on artists and how they're doing. And the third study is on the public and how it is dealing with the isolation, loneliness, and how the arts plays into that. So there will be some hints from that about what the future role of the arts will be in helping us recover from all of the stuff that has gone on. So on the first study, we had 12,000 organizations already, it's only been a month, respond to the study. And those 12,000 organizations extrapolated out to the 120,000 shows a loss of some $5 billion already. If you add up the budgets of all 120,000 nonprofits, it's about 66 billion, and they've already lost 5 billion in a month of revenue. So that's really tough. And you also see that they have lost their ability to convene people. I mean, most of the arts are a face-to-face business, the performing arts in particular. You can't convene, you don't have the ability to use your very product to make more money. So what's happening is that we predict from the data 12,000 organizations, 10% of the 120,000 will go out of business. Now, just for a profile of that, it won't be most of the big ones because the big ones have set up pretty sophisticated patron and funder connections. And it won't be, forever, the really little ones, because the really little ones have no resources and they work for the love of it. So, they take salary cuts, they do anything to survive. But in the middle are so much of what has been the growth in the last half century are wonderful mid-sized arts organizations. They have investments in facilities and things like that. They have a lot to lose. And so a lot of them, I think, will be going out of business. Now, there will be reinvention. Already we see arts organizations reinventing online ways to reach the public. But marketing of that also has to be reinvented because a lot of it's going out for free right now and they have to figure out a way to monetize what they're giving. But I think that, so that's going to be particularly difficult for arts organizations. On the artist front, even worse. The federal government says there's 2.5 million people out there making their living as artists, the primary living as artists in our country. And we, in our studies, found that 95% of them reported that they had had significant monetary loss, and that they had, on the average, $24,000. They only were expecting to make $40,000 this year, and they had a $24,000 projected loss. That's devastating. The other thing is that most of them do not have any savings or any long-range plans for figuring a way out of this. That's where we come in. We can help with money. Our lobbying efforts in this pandemic have created about $6 billion worth of relief. Now, you don't hear about most of it. You hear about the $300 million that's going through the National Endowment for the Arts and the insurance for individuals, which is significant. But the insurance for individuals allows an artist, and that was clarified. We got that changed so an artist could be eligible, or what's called a gig worker, which is what a lot of the arts rely on, people that are the lighting designers or the stage folks that just work from job to job, got them to be eligible, and it gives them something like $1,000 a week for a year, which is significant. So we lobby for those kinds of reliefs. Those are temporary reliefs, though, and that's where I talk about the devastation. Yeah, I don't know how long the federal government could keep pumping that into such a large industry. we're going to push for it as long as we can. But the real thing is the training that we are going to try to provide on things like marketing and how do you figure out a way forward in a completely changed environment. The performing arts organizations are thinking that even though things are opening up right now around the country, whether that's good or bad, but the performing arts organizations think that that it could be 2 years before any of the big houses can let people back in, or that people would want to go back in and sit next to other people. So that's why I think it's going to be devastating, and we're working on the advocacy front and the training front to help.
Great. Lucas, do you have a question? That's a great answer.
Thanks.
I do, yeah. This may be a little bit of a broad question, but in what ways do you think art and having art programs is so important in school, like all the way from lower grades, like preschool, all the way to high school?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, the arts component is the human component of your learning, in my opinion. It makes it permeates, yourself and pops out as creativity in other areas. Maybe you're, like Einstein used to talk about his violin and his affinity for the arts as the place where his ideas for the science came from. It's just one example. But I think that the data also shows us that. So when we just recently did a survey of business leaders in America, and what is it that you as a business leader want in a 21st century worker? And at the top of the list, right near the top, number 2, was creativity and innovation. And then we asked another survey, where does creativity in your mind come from? And the number 1 thing was having arts in high school and college. Now that's amazing, because you don't necessarily think that the business community would think that. But if they think about it, they do. And they're hiring people who, maybe in some way, and arts would be a big one, have shown that they are creative or entrepreneurial. And that is, look at where we are right now. Everybody is having to use creativity to reinvent whether it's a restaurant or whether it's a factory. And so they draw upon the skills and the disciplines that you learn in the art. A lot of people, think of the arts as sort of this fluffy thing on the side, but in fact, all of you who have been doing the things that you've been doing know you can't do it without intense discipline in whether it's design or a course or all of the areas that you're involved with. Even in rock and roll, which looks pretty loose, if the 4 of you aren't coming in at the same time, it's not rock and roll, it's something else. So I think that that's a value, and we have to, now from the advocacy side, we have to make a better case, or an ongoing case, because go back to the Puritans. We got this thread of people that just don't want it to be true. They don't like to see people happy and joyous, I think. So we have to continually make the case about the values of the arts. I mean, for example, one of the attacks that's happening right now on the money that we got for the arts, and we're already under attack for, is that this is supposed to be about jobs and the economy, and not and so why give the money to the arts without necessarily realizing that a job in the arts is the same as a job as a trucker or a machinist. It's what puts food on the table of that family, that arts family, just like the other jobs, but somehow they try to make it a little less eligible, let's put it that way. So we have to do a better job of telling the story about the value of the arts to that education and to life, in general. Here's an example of something that's interesting. Examples, but we do a lot of research. And so the mayor of Dallas, Texas, and the mayor of Chicago were competing for Boeing to relocate about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and they were competing, and the contract went to Chicago. And so the mayor of Dallas tells the story. Why did it go to Chicago? And they did a survey, and the reason that Boeing chose Chicago, better cultural activity access, because that's what their workers were looking for, the families were looking for. They wanted a community of culture that was better. And so Dallas then ramped up its activities to get more arts in there so they could be more competitive in the business market. So we have to tell those stories and make those kinds of arguments in order to get the arts supported. Now, what's funny about the arts, artists hate those arguments. Artists don't want it to be about the business community or jobs. They want it to be about the art. And so we always lead with the inherent value of the art, just what it has given you in terms of joy and life-changing. All of you have had that. You've had the epiphany if you're doing this kind of work that you've described here about what it means, the meaningfulness of the arts. We lead with that, but we follow up with 10 practical examples of why the arts are important.
I have a question, Mr. Lynch. This is so fascinating. We could talk to you all day. Could you tell us a little bit about your home and your collection? I've been in Mr. Lynch's home. He and his wife, Diane, they hosted us last year with some of our alumni. But could you tell us about what you like to collect?
Yes, I will. And actually, before I do, I just want to say one more thing about my BC High experience, which I think is different maybe than yours. And that is that when I was at BC High, in my entire time there, I had all Jesuit teachers and only 3 secular teachers. But one of the 3 secular teachers was Grace Reagan's father, Mr. Cotter, who was my history teacher. And most people knew him as the coach of the football team, but I didn't play football, so I knew him as the history teacher, and he was a very good one, let me put it that way. But it's a different experience. It's an interesting difference, I think, but it was a valuable one. And my favorite thing at BC High, because of playing music and other things, was the Saturday night dances that I talked about. And our Saturday night dances were accompanied by 20 Jesuits walking amongst us, saying, "Make room for the Holy Ghost," if we got too close to the girls that we were dancing with. So those are great memories there. And so I forgot the question, Grace. I'm sorry.
To talk about your art collection. What you like to collect.
So I have come to collecting in a different way. My collections are less collections than buying things that are meaningful to me, largely because they relate to a person in some way. The first thing that I started to collect was what I used to make as a woodcarver, fireplace bellows. The thing that you use to stoke the fire, they sort of a roundish shape. You can't really see them, but I got 50 of them behind me and another 100 on the walls around here. So I for 2 years worked as a woodcarver, making wooden objects and selling them, and discovered, that's the second hardest way to make a buck in America. Poetry is the first, and woodcarving is the second hardest way, because it takes a long time to create something. So when I stopped making them, things like this, I used to do these little nameplates, and so this one is carved. I started to collect. When I stopped making, I started to collect, and so I have these wonderful wood-carved bellows as the first thing. Then I got excited. I had never had any visual art training, but I hired a couple staff people who did. I learned from them, just like I never really knew dance, but I learned about dance, ballet, and performance from Diane. And so I love it all, but you need a little bit of knowledge in order to appreciate. But on the visual front, we've had so many great artists who have helped us with the lobbying or with other kinds of things that I started to collect their work. I love the work, but I love the connection. Everything I have has a story. So I don't know if those of you who are working in design know the artist John Baldessari. But John Baldessari was one of the maybe top 5 American visual artists contemporary design art. And he used to help us in so many, many ways. And so I have a poster back here by him that he did for us going in 2008 to the Democratic and Republican national conventions, which we do during every presidential election. We put on a big policy event and we bring artists, and we're always trying to convince decision makers about the value of the arts. And you know, that includes the presidents of the United States as well as the people at the conventions. But John Baldessari helped us, and so I have a half a dozen of his pieces here. Or people who I came across that helped when I was doing those art festivals in New England every year, art festivals at the Arts Extension Service. We used to do the biggest art festival in New England, which is why I loved the fact that BC High was going to do an art festival. But I collected the work of the poster artists that we worked with. I got to help select them, so that made me get to know, I mean, the ones that we selected were ones I liked, and then I collected some of their work. So we have wood objects from the wood carving years and flat work from the wall work and paintings and so on from the later time. And then the other thing was a lot of it was place-based. So I was asked to come to Australia by the Australian government, and I lost control of the process. I always pay attention when somebody else is booking your time. And what I discovered was that I was going over there for 14 days to 12 cities in 14 days and giving 3 speeches in each city. So I saw very little of Australia. I saw mostly buildings, but they would do one thing every afternoon. They would let me go to a gallery where you could buy stuff. And so I've come back with, I came back with a dozen pieces of art from Australia that I still love, because each piece reminds me of a place and an experience, and it was something I loved visually as well. So those are some of the things that that we've done on that front. I also, you know, I was a guitar player and a piano player and a mandolin player and a singer. Okay, but I wasn't great at any of them. I'm a great, you know, part of a band, harmonizing with other people and playing. And because I haven't had as much time in recent years to do as much, but I still try to play out somewhere in some way every couple of months. I have found that I collect guitars as opposed to learning how to play them better. So I have about 10 lying around the house. There's one behind me here, Martin D18, and I love that. I love the different sounds. I love the look of them, and they are also handcrafted objects. The craft work, that piece is still part of my life because I am on the boards of the American Craft Council and the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, 2 organizations for the craft world. So I keep the threads going in different ways. That, you know, there's a policy thread to something that was a physical, hands-on thing. So those are the fun things. And I have I have 3 or 4 pianos, so I guess I collect pianos too. And I'm looking at one across the room that's a white baby grand piano. Why do I have a white baby grand piano? Well, my work has put me in touch with many interesting people, as was said before. One of them is Yoko Ono, the wife of John Lennon, who's helped us with a lot of advocacy and tweets and things like that. I went to visit her in the Dakota in New York, her apartment where she and John Lennon lived. And it's exactly the same. Nothing was changed. And for the meeting, she sat me down next to John Lennon's white grand piano that was on the cover of one of his albums, you know, which was, I mean, John Lennon's like a god to me. And so this was an amazing experience sitting next to his white grand piano. My wife, Diane, had a ballet career, 25 years, starting with the Paris Opera Ballet, ending with the Pacific Northwest Ballet. But in the middle is something that fascinates me. This would never be at the top of her list, but fascinates me. And that is that she did 6 months dancing ballet in Las Vegas with Liberace and his white grand piano. So, you know, why do I collect a white grand piano? Personal experiences together, it said to me that I need to have one. So we did it. Other questions?
We have about 10 minutes left. So gentlemen, do you have any other questions? Or Mr. Lynch, do you have any questions of the boys?
So as you're thinking of a question, and I tell all my staff, if ever you're in a fundraising meeting or an advocacy meeting, and somebody says, "Do you have any other questions?" You have to have another question. You got to keep the dialogue going. So think of some, and that has allowed us to actually raise a lot of money, which I have to do right now, just because of the losses that we have from our we had to cancel at American CIS. We had to cancel all physical events, all attendance events for this year, which is a huge income loss. And we also have to do more on the advocacy front because of the need. So the result is that we're predicting a $3 million extra need per year for 3 years, $9 million that I'm spending my time right now raising, out there trying to raise. And so that is something that every art skill that you have, every creative skill that you have goes into something like that in order to raise that money, and trying to create dialogue with different funders and so on. One of the things I use as a tool is not asking for things, but asking for help, asking for information, asking for dialogue. And that then leads to teeing up the arrival of the money. The writing of the grant is a skill too, but it's the last skill. It's the one after the relationship is built. So anything else that I want to say, I think that the arts are a critical, they're going to be more critical in the healing process and in the rebuilding process that is happening right now than anybody could understand. This dialogue process and talking process has gotten me to know pretty well some people, very powerful people like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. But recently when she was asked about the future and was she completely pessimistic about what was going to happen with all of these dire things, her answer was, the one thing that will get us through this is the arts. Now, that's gold coming from Nancy Pelosi. But it is, it's part of the arts village to get these people who are policymakers involved, as well as all the other tools. One other thing about her, in the earlier times when I was getting to know her, we, now 15 years ago when Obama first came in, there was a downturn, an economic downturn. And so we were pushing for economic recovery, and a big economic recovery bill came out, just like the one that just came out for the pandemic, the CARES bill. And in this bill, we were pushing for money for the arts in there. And so the strategy was, we got our policy team together, we thought things out, we asked for $1 billion, hoping to get nickels, but we put a big ask out there. And we used our 5,000 local arts agencies to work locally to get that ask into the bill. And then we used our then 200,000 citizen activists emailing and writing to get that into the bill. And we had a bunch of strategic alliance partners like the US Conference of Mayors, the AFL-CIO asking. So we had built all of that structure, 3 fronts, and we got the 50 million in the bill. And then at the last minute, 5 o'clock on the night that the bill was being voted, I got a call from some folks that we had worked with, staffers on the Hill, and they said, your 50 million has been traded out at the last minute. If you can do anything right now, do it. And we had teed up a 4th strategy. The 4th strategy was to line up people like Wynton Marsalis and Yo-Yo Ma and Robert Redford, people like that, to each make one call to a particular congressperson. And I remember that on that particular night, Nancy Pelosi, in charge of everything, is not taking any calls from anybody. But when Robert Redford called, she took the call. And by using that strategy on all four fronts, we got the 50 million in for the arts, and that's what we're trying to do right now. So the old Hillary Clinton adage, "It takes a village," is very true for the advocacy process for the arts. Now, I've given you some time to think about questions.
Bob, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yes.
Since all the boys are juniors and next year they're going to be involved with the college process and having to write the dreaded essay, since you're such a great person who sells the organizations and is such a good advocate, do you have any suggestions for like the tone of the letters, like how best to sell themselves and win over all these colleges that they're interested in applying to?
So that, you know, that is that's its own world, and I'm not familiar with what appeals to those college officers, but I do think that they are just like the business community, interested in creativity. They're interested in you illustrating in those letters a breadth of creativity that leads to leadership. That I think what they want. I think that they, you know, it's great to have good grades. By the way, I did not have good grades. I'm always afraid that Grace Reagan will be looking into my records, and then I won't be invited.
Never.
You know, I was, and by the way, back in those days, there was a very strict like short hair rule, and then we had the band and the Beatles, and so I remember that Lucas and Brandon and Brendan, at least, when my hair was actually shorter than your hair, but a little bit longer than everybody else, I actually was thrown out for a day until I came back with a haircut. But the letters, I think, if you can show unique experiences and insights, and you know, in addition to all of the other stuff, there's a value to that. It certainly was the case for me, because, you know, on transcripts alone, you know, I might have had a harder time, but I got into every place that I applied way back then, and it partially was because of you know, essays and tests and things like that. It made a big difference. Now, I'll tell you that the Jesuit guidance counselor at BC High, wonderful man, but he was very unhappy with me because I was accepted to Holy Cross and BC, where my father had gone to Holy Cross, and I chose UMass Amherst, and he was really unhappy with that. But that's and it was the right place for me. So, anyways, that's one thought, and I you know, I think that I mean, for example, my nephew just went through the process of graduating from high school and going into college, and he actually is going to Holy Cross. So, you know, how wonderful. But you know, his some of the things that he had on his resume was that he had done a bunch of volunteer work in exotic places. Now, he had this opportunity to do it because his mother, my sister, was a foreign service officer. She's right now our U.S. ambassador in Guyana, and in places like Peru or whatever. Just the ability to connect with something unique. Not everybody has it, but in today's virtual world, you do. You know, you can make unique things and opportunities happen. And so that's one bit of advice, I guess. And love to hear back how you did, all of you. In a year.
Great. So we actually are just about out of time, but just in closing, I want to thank you on behalf of the gentleman here. This has been incredible. We're gonna publish this to our students and alumni, which will be great. So we'll edit it down a little bit. But I have one question for you before you leave.
Okay.
So I had the opportunity to spend some time, as I mentioned, with Mr. Lynch in DC, and I was in his office, and he has the most amazing pictures with the most famous people. Can you tell us what your favorite picture is?
Wow, I got a bunch of them behind me here. I'll tell you what other people's favorite picture might be. So this is a lobbying event that we did on Capitol Hill. And so I was able to get John Legend and Kerry Washington and Robert Redford to come with me to that. But this one, in many ways, would be my favorite. We give awards to leaders, government leaders and so on. John Lewis, the great Congressman John Lewis, who was a civil rights leader, had his skull fractured in Selma, walking over the bridge.
Wow.
But others, I could do this all day, you know. Somebody's in jazz, Lucas, and this is the guy, Billy Taylor, who, great jazz legend, who was one of the very first artists to help me. And he, in addition to helping me with the lobbying, he taught me a couple of little piano tricks that I still play with that actually help me sound decent. So lots of benefits from folks like that. You know, one thing I'll just say, I just convened a meeting yesterday of our artist committee, and it was a wonderful meeting. It was led by Alec Baldwin. We had Annette Bening, great actors and actresses and visual artists on it. The very first artist who helped this organization, even before I got there, was somebody you might study, and that's Ralph Ellison. Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man. He was the first artist on our board, and he was the first artist who helped with the advocacy work. And I got to know him a little bit, you know, which is amazing. You study the book in high school, and then you're sitting at dinner with the guy. You know, so, but lots of people over the years like that, who have been incredibly helpful from every art form. So, you know, when we walked through the halls of Congress with Yo-Yo Ma, the greatest cellist in the world, with him and me was Matt Sorum, the drummer for Guns N' Roses. And the two of them bookended. And one of the things that's fascinating is that when you walk through Congress with these artists, you walk around one corner and everybody says, Yo-Yo Ma, wow, you know, and they're talking. You walk around another corner and everybody says, Matt Sorum, and they have no idea who Yo-Yo Ma is. And so it's a target marketing approach, something for everyone, and that's the way we try to construct things.
So in closing, I want to share that one of my favorite pictures in Mr. Lynch's office is, and he shared it with me right away. There's a picture, I think, of President Clinton, and he said, I want to show you this picture. It's the picture of you opening in your band for the Animals, right?
Yeah. Oh, you mean with that one's here too? Yeah. No, that is my favorite. You know, the personal stuff. That one is. So it was a BC High band. 3 of the 4 members were BC High kids. One has passed away. One of the 3 BC High kids. The other one, Yoni, I still get together with him a couple times a year, and we play music. And we just did a 50th anniversary revival of the band at my own annual conference, which was great fun. And we did a 4-song concert, which was the extent of our touring in the last 50 years. But anyways.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I wish we could talk for hours. I think the boys would love it. We'll get you all Mr. Lynch's contact information so you can reach out to him. I'm going to share the picture of you that you have with your band with the boys. That would be great. But thank you so much on behalf of BC High for all that you do for the arts and for all that you do for our country. We hope that you and Diane are safe. And thanks for all that you're doing for BC High.
My pleasure. And I was going to wear some of my BC High paraphernalia today. I have this great vest that you gave me with the crest. And but I settled for the sport coat.
It's great.
came up for you guys. So
Aw.
because I saw your note about dressing appropriately. I took it to heart. So
That's great.
anyways, thank you. Appreciate
All
it.
right, great.
Aw.
Have a great day. Thank you
I
so
will.
much,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bob.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.